Book of Heaven, Volume 7, Part 7. January 25th, 1907. Chastisements. She sees cities deserted. I am going through most bitter days because of the almost continuous privations of blessed Jesus. At the most, he makes himself seen in passing and like a flash, and immediately he hides so very deep within my interior that I cannot even catch sight of him, and always in silence. So when I saw him after much struggling, and he was all embittered and oppressed, I said to him, "But tell me at least, what is it that makes you suffer so much?" And he, unwilling, only to content me, told me, "Ah, my daughter, you do not know what must happen. If I told you, you would break my indignation, and I would not do what I have to do. This is why I keep silent. So calm yourself about the way I act with you in this period of time. But courage, it shall be so very bitter for you, but do it as an athlete, as a generous one, always living, but as though dead, in my will, without even crying." Having said this, he hid deeper within my interior, leaving me as though petrified, without even being able to cry for his privation. Now to obey, I write that even before the month of January, until now, I do nothing but find myself outside of myself. It may also be a dream, but I seem to see places in desolation, cities deserted, entire streets with the houses closed, with no one walking along them, and dead people. My fright at seeing these things is such as to render me as though dazed. And I would like to imitate my good Jesus by remaining, I too, taciturn and silent. Why this I am unable to say, because my light, Jesus, does not tell me anything. I wrote this only to obey. Deo gratias. February 20th, 1907. Lack of correspondence to Grace. It continues with him, always in silence, in passing and like a flash. I spend my days in bitterness, and as though dazed. It is as if my whole interior has been struck by a thunderbolt, without being able to move either forward or backward. I myself am unable to say what has happened in my interior. I believe it is better to keep silent than to speak about it. And then this morning he came for just a little and told me, "My daughter, one who does not correspond to my grace lives like those birds that live by thievery. In the same way, the soul does nothing but live by thievery. She steals my grace. She lives and does not recognize me, and she even offends me." And he disappeared like a flash, leaving me more dazed than before. March 2nd, 1907. There is nothing that equals suffering willingly. Continuing in my usual state, and having learned that almost the entire town was with the influenza, and that in other places people were dying, I was praying our Lord that he would be so benign as to spare so many victims, and that he would make me suffer to spare them, since nowadays I suffer little or nothing, for he has taken this also away from me. While I was saying this, he told me in my interior, "My daughter, it was said about me that it was necessary that one would die to save the whole people." It was a truth, but at that time it was not understood. In the same way, in all times, it is necessary that there be the one who suffers to spare the others, and this one, in order to be accepted, must offer himself voluntarily, and only for love of God and of his neighbor, to suffer himself, in order to spare all others. And the suffering of this one cannot be equaled by the sufferings of all the others put together. There is no value that matches it. Do you think that the void of your suffering is nothing? Yet it is not a complete void. And if I suspend you completely, where shall the peoples end up? Woe, woe. Things do not end here. March 13th, 1907. Luisa prays to Jesus for her mother, that she may not go to purgatory after her death. It continues almost always in the same way. At the most, he makes himself seen in silence. In these last days, when he made himself seen, he would caress me and kiss me. And since my mamma was sick, he made me understand that he would take her. I would say to him, "My lord, you want her, and I give her to you as gift before you take her. I do not want to wait until you take her, without giving her to you before. But I want from you the recompense for the gift I give you, giving me as reward your taking her straight to paradise, without letting her touch purgatory, at the cost of making me suffer the purgatory that Mamma should have." And blessed Jesus would say to me, "My daughter, let me do." Returning to pray him again, I would say, "But my sweet love, who shall have the heart to see my mamma suffer in purgatory? She who suffered so much, and who cried so much because of me. It is the weight of gratitude that pushes me, that urges me, and forces me. As for all other things, do whatever you want, but in this, no, I do not give up. You shall content me, and shall do what I want." And he, "My beloved, do not render yourself too importunate. You are truly untiring, and by being untiring, you force me to content you." However, he would not give me a definitive answer. I would return to storm him, and would cry like a child, and praying him again. I kept offering what he suffered in his passion, minute by minute, hour by hour, applying it to the soul of my mother, that she might be purged and embellished, and I might obtain my intent. And he would add, drying my tears, "But, my dear beloved one, do not cry. You know that I love you. Can I not content you? See, with the continuous offering of my passion, as you let nothing escape you of what I suffered for your mother, her soul is inside an immense sea, And this sea washes her, embellishes her, enriches her, inundates her with light. And to assure you that I shall content you, when your mother dies, you shall be surprised by a fire, and shall feel burned. I remained content, but not certain, because he had not yet told me whether he would take her straight to paradise. May 9th, 1907. Death and Purgatory of Luisa's parents. It has been a few months since I wrote, and with great repugnance, and only to obey, I begin to write again. Oh, what a weight I feel! Only at the thought that I could say to my beloved Jesus, "See how I love you more, and how my love grows, since for love of you alone I submit myself to this sacrifice, and for as long as it lasts, I can also say that I love you more." Thinking that I can say to my Jesus that I love him more, I feel the strength to make the sacrifice to obey. Now, since I do not remember everything distinctly, I shall tell of the past, altogether and confusedly, starting from where I left when I was praying that he would take my mother to paradise without her touching purgatory. Then on March 19th, the day dedicated to Saint Joseph, in the morning, while I was in my usual state, my mother passed from this life into the sphere of eternity. And blessed Jesus, allowing me to see her as he was taking her, told me, "My daughter, the Creator takes his creature." At that moment, I felt I was being invested, inside and out, with a fire so alive that I felt my bowels, my stomach, and all the rest burning. And if I would have something, it would convert into fire, and I would be forced to bring it up immediately after I had swallowed it. This fire consumed me and kept me alive. Oh, how I understood the devouring fire of purgatory, that while consuming the soul, gives her life. The fire does the office of food, of water, of death, and of life. But I was happy in that state. However, since I had only seen that Jesus had taken her, but he had not showed me where he had taken her, my happiness was not full. And from my very sufferings I would draw concern, since those would be the sufferings of my mother if she was in purgatory. And seeing blessed Jesus, who in these days has almost never left me, I would cry and say to him, "My sweet love, tell me, where did you take her? I am content that you have taken her away from us, because you keep her with yourself. But if you do not have her with yourself, this I do not tolerate, and I shall cry so much until you content me." And he seemed to enjoy my crying. He would embrace me. He would sustain me. He would dry my tears and would say to me, "My daughter, do not fear. Calm yourself. And once you have calmed yourself, I shall let you see her, and you shall be very pleased. Besides, you can have the certainty that I have contented you from the fire that you feel." But I would continue to cry, especially when I would see him, since I felt in my interior that something was still lacking to the beatitude of my mother. So much so that the people who surrounded me, who had come because of the death of my mother, in seeing me cry so much, thinking that I was crying because of the death of my mother, were almost scandalized, thinking that I had moved away from the divine will, when more than ever I was swimming in this sphere of the divine will. But I do not appeal to any human tribunal, because it is false, only to the divine, that is full of truth. And good Jesus was not condemning me. On the contrary, he would compassionate me, and in order to sustain me, he would come more often, almost giving me a reason to cry more, because if he would not come, with whom was I to cry to impetrate what I wanted? The people were right because they judged from the outside. And then after all, since I am so very bad, it is no wonder that the others would be scandalized by me. Then after quite a few days, as good Jesus came, he told me, "My daughter, be consoled, for I want to tell you and show you where your mother is. Since before and after she passed away, you have suffered continuously that which I earned, did, and endured for her good in the course of my life. She partakes in what I did and enjoys my humanity. Only the divinity is concealed from her, but it shall shortly be unveiled to her as well. And the fire you feel, and your prayers, have served to exempt her from any other pain of senses that all must have, because my justice, receiving satisfaction from you, could not take it from both." At that moment, I seemed to see my mother within an immensity that had no boundaries, and in it there were many delights and joys, for as many words, thoughts, sighs, works, sufferings, heartbeats, in sum for everything that the most holy humanity of Jesus Christ contained. I understood that it is a second paradise for the blessed, and in order to enter the paradise of the divinity, all must pass through this paradise of the humanity of Christ. Therefore, the fact of having touched no other purgatory had been a most singular privilege for my mother, reserved for very few. However, I understood that even though she was not amid torments, but rather amid delights, her happiness was not perfect, but almost halved. May the Lord be always thanked. I continued to suffer for 12 days, so much so that I reduced myself to a thread of life. But since obedience intervened, so that this thread of life might not break, I returned to my natural state. I don't know. It seems that this obedience has a magic art over me, and that soon the Lord shall make it lose its prestige in order to take me with himself. I felt discontentment because obedience places itself in the middle so as not to let me pass into heaven. And good Jesus told me, "My daughter, the blessed in heaven give me much glory because of the perfect union of their will with mine, for their life is a product of my will. There is so much harmony between them and myself that their breath, their breathing, their movements, their joys, and everything that constitutes their beatitude is the effect of my will. However, I tell you that for the soul who is still a pilgrim, if she is united to my will in such a way that she never detaches from it, her life is of heaven, and I receive from her the same glory. Or rather, I take more pleasure and delight, because what the blessed do, they do without sacrifice, and amid delights, while what the pilgrim souls do, they do with sacrifice and amid sufferings. And wherever there is sacrifice, I take more pleasure, and I am more delighted. And the very blessed, who live in my volition, since the soul who is still a pilgrim and lives in my will forms one life with them, participate in the pleasure I take from the pilgrim soul. Another time, I remember that since I feared that my state might be a work of the devil, good Jesus told me, "My daughter, the devil can also speak about virtue, but while speaking about virtue, he casts repugnance and hatred for virtue itself into the interior of the soul. So the poor soul finds herself in contradiction, and without the strength to practice good. On the other hand, when it is I who speak, since I am the truth, my word is full of life. It is not sterile, but fecund. Therefore, while I speak, I infuse love for virtue, and I produce that very virtue in the soul. In fact, the truth is strength, it is light, it is support, and a second nature for the soul who lets herself be guided by the truth." I continue by saying that only about 10 days had passed from the death of my mother, when my father fell gravely ill, and the Lord made me understand that he too would die. I gave him to him as a gift in advance, and I repeated the same pleas that I made for my mother, that he should not let him touch purgatory. But the Lord showed himself more reluctant and would not listen to me. I feared greatly, not for his salvation, because good Jesus had made me a solemn promise almost 15 years before that, of my family and of those who belong to me. No one would be lost. But I feared very much about purgatory. I kept praying, but good Jesus would hardly come. Only on the day my father died, that is, after about 15 days of illness, did blessed Jesus make himself seen, all benign, clothed in white, as if he were in feast. And he told me, "Today I am waiting for your father, and for love of you I shall let myself be found, not as a judge, but as a benign father. I shall welcome him in my arms." I insisted about purgatory, but he did not listen to me, and he disappeared. After my father died, I did not have any new suffering as had happened with my mother, and from this I understood that he had gone to purgatory. I prayed and prayed again, but Jesus would make himself seen flashing by, without giving me time. And what's more, I could not even cry, because I had no one with whom to cry. And he who alone could listen to my crying would run away from me. Adorable judgments of God, in his ways. Then, after 2 days of interior pains, while I was seeing blessed Jesus and asking him about my father, I felt he was behind the shoulders of Jesus Christ, as though bursting into tears and asking for help. And then they disappeared. I was left lacerated in my soul, and I kept praying. Finally, after 6 days, as I was in my usual state, I found myself outside of myself, inside a church, and there were many purging souls. I was praying to our Lord that He would at least let my father come inside a church to make his purgatory, because I could see that the souls in the churches receive continuous reliefs from the prayers and masses that are said, and much more from the real presence of Jesus in the sacrament. It seems that that is a continuous refreshment for them. At that moment I saw my father, venerable in his appearance, and our Lord let me place him near the tabernacle. So it seems I was left less lacerated in my interior. I remember confusedly that on another day, when Blessed Jesus came, He made me comprehend the preciousness of suffering, and I prayed that He would let everyone comprehend the good contained in suffering. And He said to me, "My daughter, the cross is a thorny fruit that is bothering and prickly on the outside, but once the thorns and the cortex are removed, one finds a precious and delicious fruit. But only the one who has the patience to bear the bothers of the prickings can arrive at discovering the secret of the preciousness and flavor of that fruit. And only the one who has come to discover this secret looks at it with love and goes in search of this fruit with avidity, without caring about the prickings, while all the others look at it with contempt and despise it. And I, but my sweet Lord, what is this secret contained in the fruit of the cross?" And He, "It is the secret of eternal beatitude, because in the fruit of the cross there are many little coins that circulate only to enter into heaven. And with these little coins the soul is enriched and makes herself blessed for eternity." The rest I remember confusedly, and I feel it is not orderly in my mind. Therefore I move on and I stop here. May 30th, 1907. Effectiveness of prayer. As I was in my usual state, I saw Blessed Jesus for a short time, and I prayed to Him for myself and for other people, but with some difficulty outside of my usual way, as if I would not be able to obtain as much if I prayed for myself alone. And good Jesus told me, "My daughter, prayer is one single point, and while it is one point, it can grasp all other points together. So whether the soul prays for herself alone or for others, she can impetrate just as much. Its effectiveness is one." You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 7. Fiat.